Hey, I'm Matt Field. Many of you don't know who I am. I've generally just stayed quietly in the private sector, but I felt the need that I need to run for governor of the state of Utah because it seems like there's zero innovation, there's a lack of accountability, and a myriad of other problems that are currently existing. I've made shorts, and of course I've written a book that's also audio that you can download at govmat.org. It's entirely free, along with another book of mine that kind of supplements it. It's a bit of a listen, but with our age and the number of podcasts people consume each day, I figured it wouldn't be too much of an ask. However, that being said, I felt like I should get on, and instead of giving a short or a book, that I should give a quick explanation without running too long on what I'm here for and what I'm going for. And that begins with 8 priorities. The first priority is basically trying to reinforce our free agency, our God-given free agency that is currently under attack on multiple fronts. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running as a writing candidate. I did have the option of getting on the ballot and doing the whole rigmarole, but there were ample concern. If you review the Utah audit of the voting system, you'll find that there are multiple issues there, particularly with the mail-in voting system. And that's why I propose that people go in and they vote in person, particularly when they're voting for me. Write my name and take a picture of that ballot after you've done so. There has, whether you believe it or not, it doesn't really matter what you think. It really doesn't matter what you believe. But the fact of the matter is that there have been several issues in our voting system, particularly if you go back to 2020, my supplement reading where I review various records across the board, make that very clear that we don't have a secure voting system, not near as secure as it should be, and that's something that has to be addressed. That's the reason I'm running as a write-in candidate. That's one of the reasons under that first priority. But the other, probably more, well, maybe not necessarily more important, but quite important, is the removal of corruption. And I know people have run anti-corruption campaigns up and down all over the place, but this is different. We actually have a system, and it's called, we're going to lambast corruption. Okay, that's the acronym I'm using, or LAMTED if you're a comical person. So basically it's LAMBTED. Okay, we have the AS take a seat, no pun intended. But the L stands for no more professional lobbying. We have to remove lobbying entirely. There were 573 bills or so, almost 600 bills that were passed, and many of these legislators were happy that that was the case, which seems a little odd. I'm sure there were some good bills in there. But if you figure that each bill is about 10 pages long or so, it sort of depends on what the bill is, you're looking at approximately 6,000 pages. Do you think they read those 6,000 pages over the course of that 45-day legislation? Maybe they received them earlier, maybe they received them, but do you think they actually wrote them themselves? I would wager that the majority of these bills are coming from special interest groups, they're coming from parties, they're coming from corporations, they're coming from think tanks, wherever it could be. They aren't coming directly from the actual legislators. And that's because of professional lobbying. That's because of a bunch of other problems. So we have to eliminate professional lobbying. The only entity that can lobby the government for change are the citizens themselves. The next one on that list is A, which stands for accountability. There is no real accountability system that exists with your representative, only that you can not vote for them, which is pretty limited, particularly when they try and be a good little boy or girl just before the end of their term. We have to make sure that they're held accountable, and I have a proposal in my book that basically reviews over the process that which this would take place. One, you would have to request basically a form from the state, and they would send it to you on non-duplicable paper. You would fill out your concerns, the category they fall under, the area in which you live, and that would be sent back to this accountability office. It's a very basic office. I'm not trying to create more layers of bureaucracy or anything else. This is a way in which we can track their ability to respond to these correspondence. Because let's face it, you can fire off an angry email, you can make an angry phone call, you can leave messages, whatever it may be, but they're inundated with these sorts of communications, and their ability to respond to them is limited. But if you have an official communication and they don't respond to it, that's going to affect their response level. Okay? And then in addition to that, the concerns that you list on that particular form is logged away, and then that's levied against their voting record. So if you have concerns about agriculture, you have concerns about business, you have concerns about all these different things, and they never address any of those, it's going to show up as a count against them on that accountability process. The next portion on the list is M for money. There is no accountability in money. Most of the time, the government just sort of quietly goes about their business, spending our money at unproportionable rates, and of course the federal government just prints it up the wazoo. But if you go through this process, I envision it's kind of like jury duty. So if you're an accounting firm, if you're an accountant, whatever it may be, you may be called upon by the state to audit various departments, various cities, various whatever it may be, and then you are going to provide a report. And if that report reveals that they have underused, misused, or abused the funds that have been, these sacred funds, honestly, that have been dedicated to them, then there will be some firing, there will be some they'll need to pay some things back, or in the event that they underuse the funds, perhaps the people working there get a small bonus, but that budget doesn't come back the same the following year. Then we move on to the bracket system, which is B. Right now, we currently have a system where basically you have to campaign your brains out. You have to raise a bunch of money, and you basically, if you're with a party, unlike myself, who's unaffiliated, if you're with a party, then you have the ability to get much more funds, of course, from out-of-state entities. Again, very odd that they are able to influence a local election, when in all reality they shouldn't be able to. That's the same as if Donald Trump or Joe Biden were receiving donations from Hezbollah or something like that, right? They're totally and completely outside the jurisdiction of the federal government. And it's the same thing with the state. They receive donations. Candidates receive donations from parties. They receive donations from think tanks. They receive donations from whomever they can get their hands on. And by the way, in the state of Utah, there are no limits. You can get ridiculous amounts of money donated to you, and there's no limits whatsoever. On the federal level, there are, but there aren't any here in the state. So that's the current system, and basically just race to get as much money as you can. Don't return any of that money. Just spend it away like nobody's business. And for some, like Evan Mullen, don't pay it back either. But in those instances, those have to all be removed. Okay, a bracket system would function much like March Madness is right now. You'd have one versus the other until the very end. Once that's completed, you break them down into geographical areas until it would be 2 versus 2, 2 versus 2, maybe 3. And then at the very end, you vote for the final candidate. There would be no augmentation of any particular individual. If the media wants to cover them, they have to cover them everybody with equal time and equal exposure. The next on the list is T, standing for terms. Terms do not exist in Utah either. Another weird thing. But when people stay in office for far too long in the conditions that government currently operates in, which is just full and complete corruption, they themselves will become corrupt. It doesn't matter how good you are or how nice you are. You will become corrupt if you are left in a bad situation for long enough. And that has to be eliminated. So I propose that they have 8 years maximum for elected officials, 10 for appointed. And anyone else that can basically have some level of legislative power, they have a limit of 10 years as well. Not all employees. I mean, if you're the DMV, let's hurry it up at the DMV, by the way, but stamp away. Right? Do what you have to do there, but you're not actually instigating any sort of policy. The next on the list after that is we're at TED, so terms, elimination. We have to eliminate all of the parties. Now, this isn't Hitlerian. Hitler eliminated all of the parties except for the Nazi Party, of course. I'm saying eliminate all parties. This is something that George Washington advocated for. He warned against parties and their influence on elections because they begin to generate massive amounts of power that allow them to basically do whatever they need to, however they need to. And that's exemplified in the fact that we only have basically 2 choices every single election between a Democrat and a Republican. When in all reality, who on earth actually completely accepts the entire proposal of either of those parties? And the answer should be 0, because if you are, then you probably haven't read everything that they have published and the things that they decide that they're going to stand for. We have to vote for individuals and the things that they've accomplished and the things that they're going to stand for. And I also propose in the book that maybe instead of parties, we just have people take a test. If they want to run for public office, you tell everybody what you believe in, what you're going to stand for, and people can review that with their ease online. Okay, this is something that can be done very easily and be implemented very simply. The last one on the list is decadence. Right now, government officials enjoy amazing galas. They get invited to basketball games. They get to enjoy all these amazing benefits just because they're an elected official, which should be entirely illegal. Okay, there actually are provisions in the state law that allow people to glean certain amounts of benefits from the public dime, which I don't know why they would actually put a limit on that. It should be zero. That should be the limit, actually. But that should be entirely eliminated, and that includes titles. I mean, that's why my website is GovMatt, right? I'm Matt right now, and I'll be Matt after I'm elected. Okay, this is the way that we need to approach things. We don't need to have some solemn reverence for the governor. He's a guy just like everyone else. Okay, and treat him just like you would anyone else. Hopefully, we're all treating everyone nicely and kindly and all that sort of thing. But there's no reason that we have to give special provisions for any particular elected official. So that's the first priority. And I know that's a little bit of a mouthful. We're already 11 minutes in here. But and after that, I've got 7 more of those. So I'm going to go through those as quickly as I can. Stay with me. This is going to be shorter than the book itself. But I'm hoping that this will be able to give you what you need to know in order to determine whether or not I'm a worthy candidate to be elected. And by the way, I'm the only one that has a proposal like this. Okay, and as far as I know, the only one that has ever made a proposal like this ever, as far as I'm aware. So we move on from the first priority, which is our free agency, onto our second priority, which align with the Bill of Rights, which is our right to bear arms. Now, Utah has actually done a very good job, for the most part, in terms of allowing people to bear arms. We're able to protect ourselves on an individual basis, but there is one provision in the Second Amendment that nobody talks about. I don't know why, but it's our ability to have a well-regulated militia, okay, well-armed and well-regulated militia. And there is no organization that exists right now that allows for that to happen. And so during the course of my proposal, I go through how we can establish neighborhood militias that allow us to be the first line of defense. This would include primarily support from the state, but not controlled by the state. So, for example, we would have trainings, we would have things annual and more frequently with local officials. They would have trainings with their local police departments. And this is primarily just to stop crime in their areas and to protect themselves, similar to what happened during the Black Lives Matter protests, riots, more like. People were breaking stuff, they were burning stuff. Thankfully, not too much happened here in Utah, but in the event something like that happens again, we'll be prepared in that people can defend themselves properly. And in there, I actually advocate for using less lethal things like beanbag ammo and other things like that. Now, obviously, lethal has its purpose too, but for the most part, I think most of that can be solved via less lethal. The next step the next priority we land into is our children. And this one's my longest by far in the book. And that's primarily because the state and the federal government have been frankly abusive to our kids and our youth. They have confused them, they've abused them, they've done a myriad of other things, and that leads into kind of my next acronym, SplashPad, where I go through and I talk about school. The first one is S, school, where we have to basically recreate what happens there. Many people are using co-op styled options. People are homeschooling more and more and more. And we need to start working more with the parents and their rights as parents to teach their kids and help their kids and go through that entire process, because right now that doesn't exist. We are giving raises to teachers that don't deserve them. We are forcing curriculums upon people. In order for there to be things like the 10 Commandments taught in your school, you have to have literally a motion from the state Congress in order for that to happen. This isn't the way it should be. I don't know if you knew this, but actually on the Communist Manifesto written by Karl Marx, he said one of the first things you got to do is take over the schools. So it's unusual that a conservative state like the state of Utah has decided to move in this direction. We have to get out of schools. The state has got to get out of schools and has to provide a supportive level, not a controlling one. The next on that list is the L, which refers to the LGBTQ+. Kids have been confused up the wazoo. We should love everyone. We don't have to love particularly LGBTQ, but we should love everyone. And just because they're going through confusion, we don't have to use cruel kindness to make them believe otherwise. You know, it doesn't matter. One of the best movies that explains this is Monsters, Inc. Or it's not Monsters, Inc., but Monsters University, right? You have a guy who's determined he's going to be a scarer. He goes through the whole program. He knows more than everybody, but he's just not scary, right? And that's made very clear and very evident. But he does play a massive role in the process of building others and making them better. And we have to start focusing on what people are actually able to achieve. Probably one of the biggest falsehoods that we ever encounter in our life is that you can do anything. I'm sorry, but you can't. I would love to believe somewhat that concept, but you can't. You can't do everything. And this isn't to knock you down. This is to help you realize that you have certain strengths, you have certain abilities, and you can expound upon those, and you can gain even more talents and more abilities. But to believe that you are actually going to be able to be anything you want to be is a falsehood. It's a full-on falsehood, and we have to recognize it for what it is. From there, we go on to A, which stands for abortion. And I go into depth about abortion in that these children have a right to life. And I understand that the state of Utah has been very good for the most part and following kind of more the Republican-styled stance on abortion. But we'd have to do better. And I would encourage you to read that in depth because that is a very complicated issue, but that's in my book. Again, govmat.org. You can download it for free. You can listen to it. You can read it, whatever you want to do. I have multiple references throughout the entire book, and this will help in that process. The next one in there is H, which is referring, I skipped one S, sorry. Let's see, did I do all of them? Oh, sorry, P. I missed P. S-P-L-A. And then we don't do an S, then H. The P stands for pornography. There is currently a law in the books in the state of Utah that you can't view any sexual acts, live sexual acts, right? But for some reason, if you've got a screen in front of your face, then it's okay. This is wrong, okay? And so I go through a process on which we can regulate VPNs, we can regulate various other platforms that basically, in a blink of an eye, you can pull up the most disgusting photos and videos and everything else so quickly without any real verification whatsoever. We have to protect our kids, and I make a very specific proposal for that. We have to regulate pornography, and this is a plague on our planet, and it won't stop until we make some sort of stance. Okay? People will say free speech, freedom of expression, blah, blah, blah. Hey, when you're old enough and you want to view this stuff, that's your call. But when you're a kid, no way. Okay? We have to respect our children. And by the way, pedophilia is brought about by exposing kids to pornography early on. Okay? That is the first step. That's grooming. So if you believe that kids should be able to do that, then you're probably just a pedophile, to be honest with you. So pornography has to be regulated. The next portion on that is we go on to we skip that S, right? So our SPLASH is healthcare. And look, I'm not going to tell you how to do what you're going to do with healthcare, but the government should be requiring you to do anything with your healthcare. No particular doctor should be forcing you to do anything in particular with your healthcare, and particularly children shouldn't be just getting pricked every single time they go into the office just because that's what the doctor says. The doctors have to be very well versed on what a vaccine contains, what a medication contains. They have to know what the ingredients are, what the possible side effects are, on and on and on. They have to be very, very well versed if they're going to recommend anything to your children or to yourself. Okay? From splash, we move on to pad, which P is pedophilia. I already spoke about this briefly, but pedophilia is probably the most vile practice on the planet, and I don't condemn anyone for participating in this. However, participating in this, yes, I do condemn you for that. But those that have those that are, I guess, predisposed, perhaps, or have been groomed in that way, I don't condemn them for that. However, if you are going to engage, then I'm going to ensure that the death penalty is on the table. I'm also going to ensure that if the death penalty isn't implemented, then you are to pay a lifetime wage garnishment to your victims. Okay? So the message should be clear. If you've got a problem, you got a predisposition, then go get help. If not, then get out of the state, because we will not have any tolerance whatsoever for it. From there, we move on to A, affirmative action. And the state has done a little bit on that, but just like they did some things on social media that reinforce parental rights, they have now stepped back on that. So I wonder if they're actually going to move forward with this diversity, equality, inclusion stuff. It should be meritocracy. Okay, we don't need if you believe that black people or Asian people, well, you probably don't believe Asian people because they've been discriminated against. But Mexican people, Latino, whatever, if you believe that they need to have an extra lift up, then perhaps you're the racist one. Okay? Because can you imagine telling a black guy, hey, I don't think you can do this, so let me give you a little bit of extra here. How insulting. How insulting. Okay? So we move on from that onto the final D, which is drugs. And it's surprising. If you look at statistics, it actually shows that there's 80%, I believe it's 80%, look in the book, has the references there via CDC or the NIH. But it basically says that the majority of these kids are, I think it's 80%, like I say, the majority of these kids are are taking some illegal drugs before they graduate from college, or not from college, but from high school. It's insane. And so basically I make a proposal that, hey, let's monitor the inflow in each of the states, right? So we find our freeways, we find the roads, whatever they are, and we stop people that are coming in and make sure they don't have any drugs, because we know it's coming across the border. I don't think anyone denies that. And so, but eventually it's going to make it here to Utah. So we need to make sure that we have people waiting there at those ports to stop people, make sure they don't have any drugs. And if they do, arrest them, send them to the federal government, whatever they got to do. We can't allow these drugs continue to inflow into the state. And I give a little bit more detail in my book. So again, I encourage you, govmat.org, download it for free, and listen to it or read it, whichever you prefer. So that's that's the longest one. Then I move on to the last five, and the next one is marriage and tax plan. Marriage was established by God, okay? Now, whether or not you believe in God, it doesn't really matter, but marriage was established by religion, okay? And most people back in the day were religious. It doesn't really, you were Catholic, not practicing, you were Protestant, not practicing, you grew up Jewish, or whatever it is, you were religious to some degree, and that's how you were married. It wasn't because of the state, okay? So I say we hand it over to the religions. Okay, so if you want to get married, if you want to marry whomever you want to marry, along state statutes, right? You can't be marrying kids, obviously. But outside that, if you want to marry somebody, that's up to the religion. The religion can provide that service. If you want to register that with the state, then you're more than welcome to do so. You'll have to register with the federal government, but with the state, that can be eliminated. And in addition to that, the tax plan. And this is kind of the reason why these are kind of coupled together, is the tax plan currently is stupid. You shouldn't be compelling people to pay taxes. That should never take place. Okay, people should willingly give your money for whatever cause that they deem worthy. But we live in a very bizarre society in that we've had kings for many, many centuries. And so when we came to the government doing what we're doing, we thought, hey, well, the king gets paid tax, so why can't we get paid a tax? Which is a silly approach. If we had leveraged interest, if we had leveraged various types of income from the government, and that would have been some taxes to begin with, we would have been able to completely eliminate all tax. But taxes are also a way to control the people. It's also a way in which they can find another way to expose you, to get rid of you, to jail you. I think there was a study that was conducted that indicated that at any given time, every citizen is in violation of 7 to 10 laws, federal or state, and they don't even know it. So if you think you're free, and if you decide to get in the way of the government, then by all means, you're going to find out real quick how much they care about you. So we have to eliminate taxes entirely, and we need to go to an endowment-style system. So my proposal essentially is for the next 4 to 8 years, hopefully sooner, we can wean ourselves away from that and place ourselves in a position where we can just live off the interest in an endowment fund. There would be some taxes still. People, for example, coming over from the state or from out of state, moving in, they have to make some sort of contribution to the state if they're going to enjoy the benefits. And so there are various ways that will still tax, but they're not going to be upon Utah citizens. They'll be upon those visiting. It'll be upon those that are moving in. And then once you are an official Utah citizen, you no longer pay a tax. It's very possible, but it's going to require massive cuts, and it's also going to require kind of a paradigm shift in thinking across the board with our representatives. From there, we move on to tech and news. Section 230, some of you might be familiar with it, but tech and news have essentially been mostly tech. I'm thinking Facebook, Instagram, all these other types of platforms. They've been given far too much power. They've been able to act as a publisher, but also as a platform. And so in my proposal, you have to choose. Either you're a publisher and you can moderate content, or you're a platform. And the only time that you can possibly remove content is if it's pornographic, or it's following some of the similar rules that they currently have in 230, but they've been given it's been way too lax, right? And so people can't be removed, people can't be throttled, people can't anything, and they would have to submit to audits to that respect. And if they're unwilling to live by it, then they're gone. They can't be in the state anymore. The next portion on there is news, and right now news is very convoluted. I don't know if you've noticed, but if you're listening to this right now, you probably haven't heard of me until now, but I have been in some news articles, and I have reached out to many news outlets. I've reached out to many, many people, but they're not so interested. And that's because they do what they want when they want. And that's the freedom of press. And I don't have a problem with the freedom of press. However, if you are going to peddle any particular thing, then you have to designate what it is, right? So, for example, if you are going to, you have to distinguish what they are. So, if it's news, you have to provide indisputable facts. You can't draw a conclusion. You can't do anything. And then I move on to the next thing is essay. So you can draw some sort of conclusion based upon the evidence that's provided, but you can't create an opinion. The next one would be opinion, and you can say whatever you want, right? So you can say I'm a big fat jerk, and then your article would be designated as opinion because there's no possible way to definitively determine that or prove that. And then the last bit would be promoted. So regardless of how it's being written, you would have to, whether it's actually entirely factual, if it's being promoted by some particular entity, then you have to indicate that it is promoted. We can't keep the misinformation train going forever and ever and ever. Okay. From there, after that, we move on to AI and AI creation. These last few are pretty quick. AI, essentially, we have to make sure that it does have a kill switch. This is something that people like Elon Musk have called out quite aggressively. He thinks that there has to be many, many things done to ensure that AI doesn't kind of take hold. And I also say that we need to pass an amendment that indicates that you have to be an actual biological carbon-based human in order to have life or to have rights in the state. You can't be a machine. And I know that sounds weird, especially to some of the older folks out there, but that literally has been gaining steam. There are many people that believe that they should be able to do what they want. If they decide to create new life, then they're going to be citizens. And oh, by the way, I don't know if you knew this, but in the most recent, I think it was Saudi Arabia, they had a new robot that they were showcasing, and that robot was declared a citizen of Saudi Arabia. Okay, so theoretically, in the state of Utah or in the U.S., they would then have the ability to vote. Okay, so there's some serious problems there. So we have to make that distinguishment. I also expound a little bit on that, but I'll leave it there for now. Again, govmat.org. Go download it, read it. listen to it, whatever you'd like to do. The last two are basically we have to deal with, there is some judicial legislation from the bench that really, really is inappropriate. For example, when gay marriage was approved via the Supreme Court, it was considered the law of the land. Now, let's remember that they are not a legislative branch, they're a judicial branch. And so that is not the law of the land. Okay, it's the same thing with any other judicial decision that comes down. They do not determine what is done there. Okay, it is entirely and completely based upon what the legislator does. Okay, and even they have their limits because they cannot infringe upon our God-given rights. Okay, so that has to be tamped down a little bit. And then the last one is the Great Salt Lake. This is my 8th one. The Great Salt Lake obviously has had has gotten a lot of news in the state of Utah because of the fact that it's been receding, and people have been confused as to why that's been happening. And I think it's fairly clear. I'm not entirely sure yet, but it's hard to kind of dig down to the very bottom until you have access to some records. But it's probably just mining. The state's probably over-mining. They've awarded too many contracts for lithium. And because of that process, the lithium process, literally you have to dry out certain portions of the lake in order to accomplish that. So I know but then they blame this and that, and it's just political fanfare, and it's just ridiculousness. So that can be resolved quite easily just by limiting the amount of lithium that can be mined out of the Great Salt Lake. I mean, plain and simple. So those are the priorities, and I've actually described those in great length. I know I'm 30 minutes in here now, but please, if this is the way you wanted to listen to it and you agree with me, then please find that govmat.org, share that to your Facebook, share that to your social media, help get the word out. This is a process, but I would still encourage you to read the entire thing and to listen to it. It goes into great detail. It also has multiple references that help back up the various solutions that I provide and the data that I present. So again, please do your research. I know people say it all the time, but I just want to reiterate the fact that I truly believe this is the most important election of our lifetime. And if there isn't an aggressive use of the 10th Amendment, the rights of the state, we will not be able to gain our country back, and there will be massive amounts of issues that take place with the federal government. I truly believe there will be a catastrophic event either this year or very, very soon that is going to destabilize the United States. So please take the time to research. Take the time to. If I'm not your guy, fine. I'm not going to try and convince you to vote for me. Vote for me if you agree. If you don't, then that's just the way it goes. I don't have a dog in that fight. All right. Thank you for taking the listen. Please be informed, and hopefully I might meet you. All right. Thanks.